All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Accountability Framework Initiative Company Training and Learning webinar series. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I see a lot of folks are still joining as we get going. I think this is going to be a really insightful and thought-provoking conversation. So I'm really excited that you all are able to join us. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and recordings will be available. You'll be emailed a recording if you registered, and it'll also be available on our website shortly following the webinar. We're also going to leave time for audience questions towards the end of the hour, so please use the Q&A function you should see there to ask questions, and we'll get to as many as we're able to. I think the chat has been disabled for this, so please use the Q&A function for any questions that you have. Today's webinar is the second in our two-part series on supply chain management. During last month's webinar, members of the AFI Coalition presented best practices for responsible supply chain management from the accountability framework itself, with the key message that supply chain management is the primary mechanism by which many companies enact their commitments to supply chains that are free of deforestation, ecosystem conversion, and human rights abuses. Today, we're lucky enough to have a really fantastic panel representing companies and industry associations to discuss their experiences in implementing some of these practices and managing for responsible supply chains. This discussion will be structured around the topics covered by the framework on the topic of supply chain management, including achieving traceability, assessing supplier performance, addressing supplier noncompliance, and supporting responsible production through collaboration at the landscape level. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to ask all of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then our moderator, Nigel Sizer from the Rainforest Alliance, will begin our discussion. Olivier, I'll ask you to start us off.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good day, wherever you are. So I'm Olivier Tichit. I work for Musim, which is an Indonesian plantation and refining company. And I'm the director for sustainable supply chain and based in Indonesia. And so we basically, what do? We produce and we buy crude palm oil and palm kernel, and we transform them into various products, which are then passed on further down the supply chain. So we have a large supply base, smallholders, plantations, mills, a pretty wide array of suppliers. Thanks.
I'll follow next. Hi, everyone. This is Angela. I'm from the Senior Sustainability Manager for Mars, and my work focuses in cocoa. I've been working in cocoa and sustainability for over a decade by now, and I wear two hats at Mars. The first hat is I work with our suppliers and with our buying team to make sure that our commitments are translated into concrete agreements. And the second hat that I wear is I lead our work in regards to forest and cocoa. And similar, for the ones that don't know, Mars buys, to give you a sense of the scale, Mars buys about 400,000 tons of cocoa, more or less, every year. And today we have more than 200,000 farmers in our responsible cocoa program. Happy to be here and to share our experiences in how the accountability framework has helped us in this journey. Mignon, I'm gonna hand over to you since I see you next on the slide.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I'm Mignon Senuta, and I'm the manager of ESG strategy at McDonald. So I partner across the business to develop and integrate policies and programs related to ESG and also report on our progress to external stakeholders, including investors. So while we've been on this journey for a while to support deforestation-free and resilient supply chains, we're definitely seeing an uptick in interest from investors who are seeking to better understand and engage on deforestation risks across their portfolios. So from the ESG lens, we've been seeing the growing need to connect the work of our supply chain and our sustainability and our finance teams. So it's truly become integrated across the company. So I'm really excited to be here today to learn from other panelists and share what I hope are some helpful insights from a whole team of folks at McDonald's who are actually leading this important work.
Okay, I think I'm next and the last one. So my name is Anton from Brink. I'm from the Netherlands myself. I work for FEFAC, which is the European Compound Feed Manufacturers Association. So it's not a company like the others. We don't purchase anything. We're based in Brussels, Belgium, and we represent the interests, the sector interests of the compound feed manufacturers at EU policy level. We're over 60 years old. And just to be clear, compound feed, that's the feed for food producing animals. So it's not pet food. And today I'll be talking about soy, as soybean meal is the most important protein source when it comes to compound feed manufacturing. Myself, I've been over 8 years with FEFAC now. I have the senior policy lead on sustainability, with particularly on my dossiers, responsible soy sourcing and deforestation. Big task of the last year has been the upgrade of the soy sourcing guidelines. We released the upgrade in February this year, and it includes a module on conversion-free soy. But I'm also involved in other topics as regards sustainability, such as environmental footprinting. And if you're interested in what we do on sustainability, you can have a look at our feed sustainability charter, which we released last year to have the overall picture.
Well, thank you, Anton, Mignon, Angela, and Olivier. It's great to see you all. We really appreciate you taking the time to work on this panel with us today. My name is Nigel Sizer. I am the Chief Global Alliance Officer with Rainforest Alliance in New York, and I also serve on the steering committee for the Accountability Framework Initiative and the wider partnership that is part of. We're going to cover a number of major topics today. I will be directing some questions to different panelists, and we'll be talking about traceability. We'll be talking about assessing supplier performance, addressing supplier non-compliance, and supporting responsible production through collaboration at a landscape level. So obviously that's enough for a whole sort of week-long conference. We've got an hour, so we'll dive straight in here, and we'll start with some questions to Olivier with Musim and Mignon with McDonald's. So on traceability, the accountability framework details how companies can achieve sufficient traceability to manage for deforestation, ecosystem conversion, and human rights impacts in their supply chains. And companies can either establish full traceability to the farm or the plantation, or else look to other methods such as certification, tracing supplies to low-risk jurisdictions, or using suppliers that have full traceability and verification of responsible sources of their own. So my first question is to Olivier. Olivier, how does Musim work to achieve sufficient traceability in its palm supply chain? What have been some of the successes or breakthroughs in traceability? What do you see as some of the bottlenecks and next frontiers? And of course here, particularly mindful of the challenges with smaller palm oil producers that are in the supply chain. Olivier.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Yes, traceability. So I think for us, the AFI on that how can I say, it's reassured us in a way. It's helped us see that what we intuitively felt was the proper way or the appropriate way of looking at traceability was not just a crazy idea or a crazy feeling. So when the AFI says that we must find a reason, we can use basically, if I translate it, what is the point of having traceability? The point of having traceability is to reach a certain goal. It's not just to attain 100% traceability and know every small producer. You mentioned challenges. So in our industry, like in many industries, we rely a lot on smallholders. At the moment, so the estimation in Indonesia is that about 40% of the producers are smallholders, or the area farmed anyway is smallholders. And projecting in the future, we can see that the expansion is going to come, if any, from smallholders more than from large producers. So how do we plan for that? How do we manage that in a supply chain, knowing that these smallholders are free? That's one of their strengths. That's one of the beauty of being a smallholder in Indonesia. There's many downsides, but one of them is that they're quite free, meaning that today they're in our supply chain, tomorrow they're not in our supply chain. How do we adapt to that? So how do we use traceability, and how do we still be, how can we still fulfill our commitment of no deforestation, no exploitation in our supply chain, and still handle the smallholders? Well, the point is, how do we then look at traceability, not as per individual, per person, if you want, but how do we then look at a risk-based approach to traceability? And I would say that was, for us, the breakthrough, or at least where we see a successful approach. How can we make it so that not only for us, but for our suppliers as well, we can go possibly at the village level, which is a good starting point, and say some villages have low risk, some villages have higher risk. If you have a low risk village, is it really a good use of your resources to go for full traceability? Of course, we are happy to have it, but if it's not a good use of your resources, do not focus on the low risk villages, but focus on higher risk villages and either exclude if the risk is extreme, or make sure that then you go further in your traceability and learn to know then farmer by farmer where they are, to know which ones can be included in our supply chain, which ones at the moment cannot be included in our supply chain. And the Accountability Framework initiative here guides us there and reassures us that this is not a way, or that is, how can I say, it's a correct way, or it's a good way to progress using traceability to achieve our goals. And the challenges, of course, continue because, like I said, these smallholders are in and out of our supply chain, also because in certain geographies, we find that smallholders have an extremely low level of organization. So we know that in the future, the more we work with smallholders, we need to do something which is not new, which is how do we continue supporting them to be better organized? How do we support the government? How do we do it directly? Make them into better farmers, more organized farmers, where then the traceability will be easier to achieve, and it will become more, then we can go to full traceability without having to focus like we do today on the risk level. How do we then go further in the future? How do we do so that we know every little smallholder and they know themselves and they are organized and they can then achieve something better and they can be more stable, and then traceability becomes much more manageable like it is in other commodities.
Thank you, Olivier. By the way, I saw one person raising their hand. If you've got questions, for now, please just put them in the chat if that's working, or message Leah, and we'll be collecting those and coming to those later on. Olivier, I'm going to go over to Mignon, but I want to come back to you in a minute and just ask you how you're actually doing with this. So you know, roughly talk a bit about. So I'll give you a minute to prepare. You know, what percentage of your supply is coming from smallholders? Roughly how much of that is higher risk that needs more traceability work? And how are you actually doing that? How's that going? But let me go to Mignon first. Mignon, McDonald's is a large purchaser, of course, of beef, soy, and other commodities where traceability can be a challenge. Some of your supply chains are quite long and complex. How's the company working to better understand and map its supply chain? How do those efforts support McDonald's sustainability goals? And feel free to comment a little bit on how investors are looking at this as well with you, since that's something that you spend a lot of time working on. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Well, a key milestone in our journey at McDonald's was when we rolled out a range of responsible sourcing policies, including our commitment on forests in 2015. From there, we worked with WWF and we took an inventory of our main commodities that we buy, assessed those risks, and determined that we would have the greatest impact by focusing on 5 key commodities: beef, soy, coffee, palm, and fiber used in guest packaging. So you mentioned beef. Being McDonald's, we saw a particular opportunity with beef, so we dove a bit deeper by assessing the risks associated with beef sourcing from specific regions, municipalities, and farms. We partnered with ProForest, who's a key NGO partner of ours, and AgroTools, a Brazilian technology company, to develop and implement a risk assessment methodology that's actually aligned with the accountability framework. So this methodology focuses on priority regions and identifies the areas that face particular risks, like indigenous lands, protected areas, et cetera. So we're actually able to apply a scoring system into those smaller geographic units for a more targeted assessment. And with that data and that risk score, the suppliers who source beef from regions that are at higher risk, they're asked for more detailed data so we can better monitor our supply chain. And where a high priority region or farm exists, where we've identified that using this methodology, we require those suppliers to put in place a plan to mitigate those risks and ensure that they're in compliance with our commitment on forest, and they report their progress on an annual basis. So this process has given us a clearer sense of where the risks are, what's being done to mitigate them, and how consistent our sourcing policies are actually with our commitments. For example, we require our slaughterhouses to identify each farm that supplies them with cattle. AgroTools uses their satellite imagery, so we leverage that technology of particular farm areas, and we assess whether or not those farms are complying with the policy, leveraging that technology. And if they fail to comply, then they can be suspended from McDonald's supply chain until a corrective action plan has been put in place. So supported by the more transparent data and also that external verification that we're able to leverage from AgroTools, we've seen a lot of progress. But of course, the challenges, there's always more to do. We know that there's, particular opportunities for all of us to engage more with indirect suppliers, auctions and feedlots for beef as well. And also important to continue to expand the soy traceability, as we know that beef and soy are incredibly interconnected as well. So we're committed to the continuous improvement in that fashion, and hope to expand and plan to expand this work to other commodities beyond our 2025 commodity commitments.
Thanks, Mignon. And just a quick follow-up question, and then I'll go back to Olivier. So there are persistent stories and investigations in Brazil, right, about laundering of beef and cattle between their early periods of growth and the feedlots and so on. How well do you think you're doing with the system at picking that up and addressing that, or do you think significant additional steps are going to be needed to really be able to give your customers, the full confidence that you want to give them?
Yeah, no, it's a challenge, and I think that we're trying to harness and leverage all of the tools in our tool belt. I think there's more, there's more to do and more collaboration that needs to take place. And we have our category leads and our supply chain team working very closely with our suppliers and aligning on expectations and trying to drive visibility, further along the value chain. So I think that, we're monitoring our performance. We're having our data-driven outcomes. That's the data that investors are looking for. They're increasingly applying a lens through traceability and transparency. So we're committed to that continuous improvement and recognize that there's more to do in that space as well. Thank you,
Mignon. Olivier, back to you. How are you actually doing on this? And what in a couple of minutes, what's next to really crack this, where you've got a lot of high risk suppliers in some of those landscapes?
Well, I think what came first was to break a little bit the first nut was a problem to crack was a problem of trust. We might have had suppliers for a long time. Some have been with us for a while. Some are in and out as well. It's a matter of trust, because we're asking them questions they feel uncomfortable about. Where do your fruit come from? It's none of our business in their eyes. For some of them, I think that has been the most difficult stage, was to gain that understanding that, well, we're all part of the same supply chain and we are your partners. So those who have known us for a while, I think we're a little bit keener on sharing more information with us, even though they might have felt uncomfortable about it at first. The point was to make them realize that this was not a threat to their business, but it was a way to keep the business going. And I think that's something that has registered with quite a few of our suppliers. We are asking for a lot of data. We are using that data. We are telling you sometimes that you have some risk in your supply chain and you must address it one way or the other. But the point is, to maintain the business relationship and to maintain your business going, our business going. I think that, and that's also something I found in the AFI, both on this and grievances, if we go to that later, very reassuring. Yes, there is a recognition that the business relationship is crucial. And that for us is something we knew intuitively. We consider the strength as well. Good business relationship means it has to be both ways, not only product. So how are we doing? Or how do we manage, if you want? Yeah, we do a lot of mapping, yes. And we share a lot of information with our suppliers. And it is a difficulty as well. There's another problem there. How do they understand the data? We can give them a map with a lot of villages with an idea of what the risk is. So how do we base the risk? We look at, of course, legal issues, so protected areas. We also look at standing forest. And the most difficult one, obviously, which we cannot put on a map most of the time, is the social risk or the labor risk or the human rights risk. That, if we talk about deforestation and peat, we can map that. It's quite possible. We can verify it afterwards on the ground. The E part of NDPE, the E part is the most difficult one for us to assess, to prevent. So we do a lot of research, but again, it's as good as what we can find. And we cannot go in every village and figure the E risk and the human rights or the labor risk. So we always, and that's, if I may say, at the moment, the one thing on which we are still, I wouldn't say struggling, because we have worked on tools and we have partners, we have, well, some of the NGOs part of AFI, like Verité, working on tools as well. And yes, there will be progress, but it's always the one that's really difficult, the social risk. You asked also about smallholders. So how, for Musimas, are they important? They are extremely important. We consider doing approximations of the production, of the yields. We consider we touch about a bit less than 1 million smallholders every year in our supply chain. So linked to us, that's a huge number of smallholders. And that's why we try to find tools which are not about identifying every smallholder individually, or at least not in the first step. We believe that's not the priority today. But so it's all about villages, and it's all about our suppliers feeling comfortable to be transparent with us. So we are patient with some, but most today are comfortable enough that they've shared with us enough information that we can assess the risk in their supply sheds.
Great. Olivier,
yes.
I'm going to move on here, if I may. That was great. We'll come back to you a little bit later. Thank you. Thank you both. Let's move on to the next segment here, which is on assessing supplier performance. And we're going to hear from Mars and FEFAC. A central purpose of achieving traceability is so that buyers can assess the performance and progress of their suppliers related to their supply chain goals. And there are a number of tools, systems, and platforms that are becoming available to track and evaluate that performance. So my first question is to Angela with Mars. Angela, what are some strategies that Mars is using to streamline or standardize your assessment of supplier performance in the supply chains?
Thanks, Nigel. I'm happy to take that question. I'm glad that my colleagues already spoke about the key part, which ultimately is about trust, and all the tools and everything has to go around that. So for me, the important thing is trust, but also respect. And having those two principles in mind when working about supplier performance. Because the reality is that driving change is very hard. It's not easy. And we are talking about driving change into countries and into working with villages and working with farmers, that ideas that we in this group, we are all familiar with, but may sound not so familiar for other people. The thing is, it's really key to trust, having the principles first set by the company, and then you can go into tools. And the way that we do that is going back to, it needs to have value and it needs to be valuable. And that's the starting point. How can this assessment be of value, not only for us as a company, not only for our buyers, but can we turn this assessment and giving back to the people that work so hard to enter this data? And in that sense, we use at least, well, we have a number of tools, but one of them is half of our volume is Rainforest Alliance certified. So that already has a layer of the standardization driven by the Rainforest Alliance COCO standard. But then beyond that, we also do a supplier benchmark where we gather information from our suppliers and we come up with an internal benchmark. But that's one level only, because getting data and doing a benchmark, that's not enough. That would be good for an evaluation, but our intent is to drive change. And to drive change, and that's what I want to pick up on the previously said comments, is this means turning this data into something that our suppliers can use. So we do this benchmarking, but we also do a personalized brief for our suppliers, where we share back how is it that we have gone through the data and how what comparisons and how are we looking at it? Because in that way they can see that, and ultimately it's about building trust. It's not about creating a black box that nobody understands, but it's being able to have a conversation. So that's a little bit both. And last but not least is the management of non-compliances. That I think that's something that where the accountability framework has helped, in a way that issues that we face in the supply chain are not, there's no duality. It's not a yes or no answer. It's not black and white. So in this world where we need to factor in so many different layers and so many different people involved, is where do you draw the line, and drawing the line together. And that's where I feel the tools that have been written in that way that allow for that conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angela. Let's move on to Anton with FEFAC. Anton, how is FEFAC working to improve transparency and standardization in assessment of supplier performance, and what role do the new sourcing guidelines play?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Indeed, in our case, because we're an association, need a supplier performance. In this case, would be the producers of responsible soy. And there are many out there. I mean, there's certification schemes like RTRS, Proterra, well-known. And you have the traders, the well-known ABCDs, who have their trader programs. You have farmer programs like the American soy farmers. So the question starts here from our members to FEFAC. Can you answer the question, what is responsible soy, with so much discrepancy between what is on offer and what is being asked? What demand can we meet with what offer? So we developed the first version of the sourcing guidelines in 2015, and we have an upgraded version since February this year. And they are about responsible soy, so covering also good agricultural practices, responsible working conditions, but most attention goes out to the environmental part. And we have this conversion-free module that's taking most attention, which covers both the illegal and legal clearance of natural ecosystems. And I think mentioning natural ecosystems, that's when I think really the help from accountability framework was very much appreciated, as we needed to get the definitions right. It's clear that conversion-free and deforestation-free isn't the same thing, and it was really a key request from FEFAC members that we had alignment, that we made sure is it aligned with the accountability framework. So we had some very nice lengthy technical calls and some good tips. An example is on verification side as well, because what is an adequate level of evidence you would ask of a certification scheme to say to adequately prove that they are delivering conversion-free soy. So we could make it quite specific. Okay, this is kind of the satellite material or kind of references you need to have. And I think looking back at it, we really try to integrate the accountability framework, definitional framework, and merge it into an operational solution for conversion-free soy sourcing. But if I go back to the solution we have, back to the guidelines, they are first and foremost intended to create more transparency in the market for responsible soy. So they are guidelines. They're not a standard itself. So they are in essence a set of criteria that form a benchmark for suppliers of responsible soy that they can compare themselves to. So they voluntarily apply. And this benchmarking is actually done by ITC, the International Trade Center. So we don't do this benchmarking ourselves. But you could see this as the assessment in the context of the question asked. And what happens if they pass? If they pass, they meet the feed industry, the European feed industry minimum performance level for responsible soy, and then they are displayed on a web page, a FEFAC web page on ITC sustainability map. And yeah, we really hope that this web page will function as a sort of marketplace where we connect the two halves of the value chain, if you would put feed industry in the middle, so to speak. So let's say the consumption part versus the supplier part, and where we can connect offer and demand. I think another way to see this webpage is kind of like as a portal. We would hope that really interested parties will come on this portal, see what's on offer, and be able to click through on a certain logo and really land on the certification scheme page and see how they can do business there, see what's on offer exactly. Because if you want to discuss the details on conversion free, you can discuss cutoff dates, you can discuss chain of custody models. There's a lot to choose from in that sense. And to wrap it up, we're only halfway there because the guidelines are out, but this updated webpage portal, it's not there yet. We expect to have it finalized somewhere in May. But the feedback has been positive so far. So we've noticed interest from what we call the downstream part of our end, so the consumer goods forum, who may want to look at this as using it as a reference for their members. But we see also scheme owners are keen to become benchmarked. We see soy exporting countries, they have another something to focus on. And hopefully, yeah, this initiative we have, it's a push for market transparency and a mainstream market solution.
Thanks, Anton. I'm gonna come back to you. So obviously, one of the largest soy exporters is Brazil. Problematic levels of political commitment there to addressing these issues, as we all know, that's no secret. In our engagement with the large trading companies that you mentioned, we see variable levels of alignment with AFI, very good discussions with some of them about that. How are you seeing that, and how are you incentivizing the trading companies to accelerate the sorts of changes that are needed, particularly in the soy supply chain from Brazil and more widely in Latin America? And you've got like a minute or two on that, sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks, because it's an interesting question, indeed. And I think, first of all, we need the traders. I mean, if we talk about mainstream market solutions, yeah, and there are, in that sense, maybe the good thing, there are not that many out of them out there. So you have someone to focus on. But I think, indeed, we try to move together. As FEFAC, we are the European Association of Feed Manufacturers, and we have good relations with COSAROL, which is the EU Association of Trade Associations, traders, and we have connections with the Soft Commodities Forum. So we try to make clear what is at stake here, and yeah, they're very good in highlighting the complexity of the supply chain. But we do highlight also towards them, and I hope it's an incentive. Hope it doesn't sound too much like a threat to me, but it's in Europe, we are facing really an avalanche of regulatory requirements. The term due diligence may be very familiar to most of you, where we as users of soy will be required to justify it, to show that we have no link with driving any kind of deforestation. So we have to move together to put make traceability a bit more an unconditional part of doing business, which is hard. It's a tough market, but again, I think and I think maybe the good example is that also with the launch event of resources and guidelines, we had a speaker from Consumer Goods Forum and from Soft Commodities Forum, where we really try to align on what the market demand and offer. And again, maybe I repeat myself there a bit, but hopefully indeed the sources and guidelines allow the traders and the retail and food manufacturers to meet in the middle and find a solution there.
Yeah. Thanks, Anton. And that was a helpful answer to a difficult question. And with the specter of tighter regulation looming, which might be very helpful in addressing some of these issues, as you said. Let's move on to addressing supplier non-compliance. Your comments are a good segue into that. So in cases where suppliers do not comply with companies' environmental or human rights policies, the accountability framework provides guidelines for addressing these non-compliances. These include methods for engaging with suppliers to come into compliance, but also may require suspending purchases or excluding suppliers when there is severe or persistent non-compliance. Earlier on, Angela talked about sort of that difficult area in there, that it can be quite hard to draw those lines, of course. So the first question is back to Olivier with Musim. Olivier, how does Musim communicate its expectations to its suppliers on the course of action, and when you have significant non-compliances? What are the greatest challenges you face in bringing suppliers into compliance? Can you find the lines within that difficult gray area?
Thanks, Nigel. Well, the lines are very difficult to draw indeed, and they are a bit personalized, I would say. So we work with our suppliers, we collect a lot of information from them. We make for each and every one of them as well a roadmap, what we call a roadmap. And so they have their little plans. For those who are certified, it's easier. So what happens when there's a non-compliance? We have a system which we call our controlled purchase protocol. And it's a ways of seeing how do we signal very clearly there is a problem, it's a grievance. So you enter the grievance process. And how do we link that to the business? I'll make it very simple. What we're trying to tell our suppliers is show us progress, show your commitment to change, and do your utmost to stay within our supply chain, because otherwise you will be excluded. And then to come back, it's a lot harder. The wall is quite high. The wall we've made is quite high to re-enter. So stay in. How do you stay in? Well, listen, try to see where is the problem. Try to understand where the problem might be. And it's most difficult when you're talking about social issues, obviously. And so our system is really strongly linking the business and the commitment or the change or the actual change of the suppliers. We have been in the past reducing our volume of purchases from, in particular, one supplier. Why? Because we realized they were extremely defensive on what had happened, and they didn't want to change because they felt they were unjustly attacked. And we said, okay, fine, it's your position, let us explain. But in the meantime, we will reduce the business a bit, and a little bit, and a little bit more, until we had to exclude them from our supply chain, much to our regret, but we had to do it. And we could not see no progress or no recognition of the problem and no plan to address it. So other suppliers, on the other hand, we've seen success there where we said, look, there is a system. If you want to change, let's draw together an action plan with deadlines. We'll monitor it with you and we'll be by your side to try to get things better. And then we will keep you within our supply chain so that you see that we have an interest also in your progress. We're not simply excluding you and then saying do better and you can come back when things have gone better. So, but it's very difficult indeed. And for us, our buyers, I mean, the cold face we face is the producers. Some of the other panelists, their cold face is the consumer. And we face it, and they are critical to us, our suppliers and the consumers, of course. So we need to manage, and some of them we've known for a long time as well, and yet we will have to say, sorry, there is a line, there's a real clear line. You cannot cross that line, or if you have crossed it, how do you fix it? How do you make it so that you recognize the problem and you work with us to address it? But if you do not want that, then you have to be excluded. And again, I don't want to praise the AFI just because I'm glad to be on this panel, but the truth is AFI is putting itself in a difficult position here because it is saying that yes, business relation is extremely important and supporting progress is extremely important. And for us, our controlled purchase protocol is very clear there. We support and we will be by the side of the suppliers who are committed to change and who will change, who do change. These suppliers we will support and we will maintain business relationships with them, even though we might get a lot of pressure from downstream to exclude them because something has happened. And it is a bit difficult, but that's the way I think we can build trust, which is what Angela and I, we seem to be quite keen on. Indeed, we need to have that trust that people understand. Yes, it costs you sometimes that change, but it also means we recognize it and we keep the business going. So you are still, all the doors are open to you still to sell. You can sell to us. You might be able to sell to others as well. And it is a better, it's the common good of both parties.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Olivier. Very much appreciate that. Mignon, back to you and McDonald's. A key piece of addressing supply non-compliance seems to be integrating sustainability expectations into a company's routine procurement process. Can you just say briefly how that's being done at McDonald's, especially considering your position as a retailer, what opportunities you see to make this kind of integration more effective? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We know that the policies and expectations that McDonald's sets as a downstream company are watched really closely and have the potential to make change. So we're committed to partnering with our suppliers, and a lot of what we do is what you just said, which is integrating those sustainability expectations directly into our commercial procurement processes. So in addition to the commitment on forests that I mentioned previously, we created a deforestation-free beef procurement policy in 2017, actually using the early drafts of the accountability framework, which was a great place to start because, as Olivier was saying, it provided this roadmap. It broke things down in a very clear way and aligned with the reporting and disclosure expectations that we know our stakeholders have. So we developed this policy in partnership with Arcos Dorados, who's one of our largest global franchisees in Latin America. Of course, our beef suppliers, and again, AgroTools and ProForest, who are key partners. And we use some of the framework's core principles to help flesh out some of those elements, such as key definitions. So to meet our targets, we engage suppliers by communicating clear and consistent expectations upfront, assessing their performance, and then developing and implementing a non-compliance policy when that's necessary. To facilitate the implementation, we chose to integrate our beef procurement policy into the systems that suppliers were already using. And this helped facilitate collaboration internally between our sustainability, supply chain, and quality management teams as well. So it had sort of this nice unifying effect. And this integration helped ensure that our compliance was effectively managed through our global quality systems team, which has already overseen the specifications for our products and raw materials that we purchase. So it was most effective to embed those social and environmental requirements directly as well from a responsible sourcing perspective. The policy also just made it easier for those teams to communicate expectations overall, both internally as well as to our suppliers. And from an ESG lens, assessing and reporting on our progress as a company for our size and scale has a lot of challenges, but we're seeing that with these reporting and assessment systems becoming more fully integrated and aligned, and the alignment that we're seeing between frameworks like CDP and the accountability framework, it's making it easy to monitor and demonstrate our progress because our reporting processes and our commercial processes, these are all directly linked to our commitment and our implementation plan. So one step is flowing into the next, and there's just greater clarity and consistency overall from an ESG lens. So given our role as a consumer-facing retailer, we know that we're in an important position to harness all of our capabilities and our scale to work with our supply chain partners and continue to drive that progress towards a more transparent and ethical supply chain.
Thank you very much, Mignon. We're going to go to one more quick question here, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So I would encourage all the people who are listening to type your questions into the chat function. That's how we're going to collect them. We've got nearly 100 people listening in here, so that will be the most efficient way to do it. We'll be coming to those in a moment. But first, I want to go back to Angela with Mars and talk about supporting responsible production through collaboration at a landscape level, which is getting more and more attention. In addition to working with your own suppliers, companies like Mars are increasingly looking to work beyond their supply chain and collaborate to address non-compliance, look at the wider policy and political environments across these landscapes and how they can drive wider change. Angela, how is Mars working on in producing regions to prevent future deforestation and other issues, child labor and so on? What do you see, at the landscape level, what do you see as the primary goal of this work in relation to your other supply chain management approaches? Just take a couple of minutes on that, please.
Thanks for the question. And it's a very timely and relevant question. And it also speaks to the maturity of where we are in regards to the journey. And here I'm going to pick up some words already that Olivier was telling us. Companies, as a company, we can go to the level of an individual farmer level, but that will have, they have the positive, but there are also things that are not so positive about it, and they have to do in terms of managing the program over time. So how do you, or is there a different way? And one thing that we are learning, and we continue to learn, not only in cocoa, but also in the other raw materials where we work with, decisions for trust, ultimately, it goes back to trust. Because if there is trust, and if trust can be created through dialogue, and through a structured dialogue, I will say, it's not only about words, but it's about, are we listening to each other? And I think that's the power that the landscape, well-implemented landscape and well-managed landscape can bring, into bringing all these different voices, because people have different priorities. So how do you go about selecting who has a biggest priority? Is it someone that is connected to an international supply chain, or is it someone that is serving a local food market? And how do you go about that? So in a way, I think it's something very new for companies, because it's teaching us into how do we go about having a structured conversations, having dialogue, and then together set what is it that we can, what do we want to get out of this together, rather than a top-down idea, this is what I want you to do, or a bottom-up idea, I'm only gonna do this if you do X. We cannot have that. So it's the dialogue. So what are we seeing? And right now I have two examples. One of them is in Indonesia, where we are starting. We have two in palm where we are a little bit more advanced, but in cocoa we are starting, and it's a fantastic collaboration. Rainforest Alliance is part of it, USAID, CIFTAL, and we have researchers and the local government. But we have only started, so I cannot tell you much into how this is going to look like, but I can tell you that the level of engagement and investment that it takes in listening is very key. The other example where we are more active in the landscape project is in Asunafo region in Ghana, which represents about 10% of the Ghana cocoa production. So it's significant. Mars is not alone then, of course. We are together with another 7 or 8 companies, and it's under the umbrella of the World Cocoa Foundation as well. So again, what is happening there? We have taken 1.5 to 2 years with Proforest leading on this engagement as well. And it was purely to understand who are there, who are the people, what are the people that are there, and what are their aspirations. And I tell you, the challenge that I face as a professional in the company is making understand our very ambitious customers and consumers that they want to see the results yesterday. And when I talk to farmers, farmers also want to see the results yesterday. And somehow we are in the middle in trying to meet all these different demands. And our role is in showing that ultimately we can show progress, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. And how do we continue the engagement? And I want to go back to the accountability framework there, because what I think the value of this, the accountability framework, what it helps me set interim milestones that allow that things, we are going to get there. I'm not just saying, trust me, yes, we will get there, but it's, we are going to get there. And in the meantime, this is what we will do to show that we are moving forward.
Thank you, Angela. That's great to hear. We have a number of other initiatives working globally to promote wider landscape approaches, and what you're saying is very, very consistent with that. The need and the challenge, the opportunity to bring together different stakeholders at the landscape level to have a dialogue, to agree on a whole set of objectives, economic, social, environmental, and so on, and put in place the measures to advance those. It's a very important dialogue process of coming together and finding consensus on that. Requires a lot of local leadership as well, that I think we all need to be much more respectful of in our work, as you said. So thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions that came in on the chat here. There's questions around sort of the solutions around risk assessment, traceability, supplier assessment. Part of what I heard there was that there's been very good progress with satellite technology, higher resolution imagery, looking at what's happening to tree cover, what's happening to intact forest areas, and so on. So that part is to some extent addressed in terms of being able to see what's going on at a very fine scale. The social part of it, extremely sensitive around labor issues, human rights issues, land rights issues, and so on. Obviously, much, much harder to work on with satellite imagery. You've got certification systems which help to pick up some of that, although they can also struggle to detect some of those issues as well, especially where there's heavy labor intimidation and so on. I wonder if, let's see, maybe who would like to comment on that? Angela, would you like to make a comment on that? And then maybe Olivier? Yeah, would you? Or I could go to Olivier. Angela, are you comfortable?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Happy to. I think this is something that as sustainability folks, we don't always think about, but the market. What is the market asking for? And therefore, what is the market willing to pay for? And that's something that I like to remind us. It's a little bit like the airlines have these bronze, silver, and gold levels. And they go together with benefits, but also you need to get to things to get there. So I think to be able to answer, and that's the way I think about tools. There are certain needs that can be met with certification, and it's about being explicit into what you will get out of it. What we cannot do, and what I think the danger sometimes is being perhaps sometimes too optimistic about what it could happen, and we end up communicating the outlayers into the good things that would happen, and we forget talking about the core. So it's really part of it in terms of the tools and choosing what is listening to your customer. What do they want? Then translate that and then be clear into what they are getting, but also what they are not getting. And if they want to go further, what would it take?
Thanks, Angela. Olivier, do you want to make a quick comment on how you're trying to do better at picking up some of the social issues that the satellites are not very helpful with? Is that something do you see other types of technology or other approaches helping with that could become part of certification programs or approaches that the company itself sets up?
I'll try to answer that if you allow me to make a small comment about landscapes afterwards.
Yes, as long as you're brief on both.
I'll try to be, well, I'll be brief on the first one. It's very difficult on the social side. I think there are tools which exist, and we know there are some systems with direct access, and we find it very, very difficult. It's overwhelming. The information you get is overwhelming, and the verification of the information is overwhelming as well. And it's putting the burden on either our suppliers or on ourselves, or even on our buyers. And it's extremely difficult to manage. I think for us, I'll say for us, for example, our controlled purchase mechanism or protocol, we have set deadlines for the deforestation and peat issues. We have specifically not set deadlines in terms of time, X days to do this, Y days to do that. We've specifically not done that for labor, land rights, other social issues, because we recognize they're extremely difficult to pick up. So no, the technology does not exist yet, much to our regret. There is no technology to pick up social issues. And especially because it can be at the same time something that's been simmering for 10 or 15 years, a land right issue, let's say, or it can be something that happens tomorrow because there's a change in management in a company and there's a bad manager and workers are treated unfairly, or there is even potentially a sexual harassment issue. And so we have those extremes in terms of social issues. I'll make just a quick thing about landscape. Sorry. We see also for us, of course, landscapes are critical because, like I said, we have all these smallholders or small producers who come and go. So we want landscape transformation. We look at it we found something. So for us, we've decided, what do we want to do? We are very big on livelihoods. For us, livelihoods are extremely important. It's a pillar of our sustainability policy. And how do we improve livelihoods? Well, we have now good experience after a very long, 5-year-long project with the IFC on smallholder extension services. We've continued that work, and we've decided that it's something we know how to do, and we find it's one of the keys for us anyway to influence local governments, or to support rather local governments to achieve landscape transformation. It might be an element. It's not the solution, but it's an element. How do we make better farmers? How do we support the local government, give them something they want and possibly need as well, at least they want it, most of them. And how do we then see them and see their commitment to, let's say, provide better services to smallholders and also get more into law enforcement? We cannot be the law enforcers. It's the state that has to do it. We do not influence them to go in a certain direction, but we can make it so that they provide something. I think Angela said valuable. I'm a bit more basic. I say, what's in it for me? What's in it for me, for the smallholder, for the local government, and then for us? And we have to find that balance. And we are quite happy with our extension services. We think we have found something that's of value and that hopefully can at least make better farmers. We're quite sure of that, but also be a tool in the box for the local governments to achieve change. So sorry if I didn't have an answer to your first question. So I tried to give something else.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna come. We're running out of time here, so I'm gonna come to Mignon and Anton for any last comments or thoughts that you have, and then I'll sort of take a minute to sum up. Just building on what Olivier was saying, in the midst of this pandemic, one of the things that I think we're learning also is that within those landscapes, programs that are able to help deliver improved healthcare and education to farmers and communities as well, integrated with conservation and sustainability efforts, can be very successful. And have a look at the Health in Harmony website for their work in Indonesia, or Pivot's work for their work in Madagascar on this, where we see some quite exciting developments, I think. Let me turn to Anton and then Mignon. I'll give you almost the last word. Anton, any comments on these questions or other thoughts? 1 minute.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for me as I don't represent a company. I don't have that direct connection to the supplier market. But now maybe I answer again the question you asked me before in that sense, because you did raise Brazil, where the challenges are, and indeed I think Olivier did mention that the need to collaborate with the supplier industry countries, where Brazil indeed is an important player here, and often challenged, but indeed, yeah, if you will look at the statements that are made by Brazilian soy organizations, that will say they have the most sustainable soy production in the world, just because of the legal framework they have. You compare it to, for example, what we have in Europe, the amount of land they have to set aside for nature conservation, lack of subsidies, or let's say absence of subsidies that we do have in Europe. It's just a need, I think, to put it diplomatically, we will have to be a bit more cautious with our judgments towards these kind of countries that are still in full development. And I think, yeah, we will have to be patient at some points, because they have a certain journey as a country to make, and it's up for if the sustainability markets can develop. Of course, that's where we need to find each other, where nature conservation can take place. But indeed, let's not lose complete hope all of a sudden.
Thanks, Anton. Yeah, thank you. Obviously it's a two-way street there. Appreciate that. Mignon, quick comment, and then we're going to wrap up, please.
Sure. Thanks. Just really quickly, I think this is an area where we're spending a lot of time thinking about now, and we actually worked in 2020 with ProForest to do a gap analysis of human rights in our priority supply chains. So we want to use the insights from this analysis to understand what is in our sort of direct sphere of influence, where can we lean in and have an impact. But just to echo others, I think this is a really complex challenge, but we're allocating increased resources and focus to it going forward.
Thank you, Mignon. Just very quickly to sum up, and then I'll hand over to Leah, who will close the call. If people have a couple more minutes, that would be great. Sorry to go over slightly. I think my perspective on this is that despite the challenges, which we've heard some quite candid comments on here, the progress over the last 5-10 years or so on this has been quite substantial. So this is a very different conversation than we would have been having just a few years ago. These are very complex issues. We can see a level of effort and sophistication and investment going on here with some of the most important buyers of these commodities in the world and their associations that surely give us some optimism that progress is going to be made. It's going to take longer. 2020 has gone by, 2025, and so on. But hopefully we're starting to move up a curve, and we're going to see more accelerated progress on this. We heard that the work on landscapes and the landscape approaches is one of the new challenges and opportunities for companies. A lot of them are thinking about this and beginning to experiment with that in some very important parts of the world, like Indonesia and Ghana. We heard about increasingly sophisticated efforts to address supplier non-compliance and appreciation for how AFI has taken a more nuanced and engagement-driven approach to that, the importance of trying to stay engaged to the utmost with those suppliers. Cutting them off, disengaging, then leads to all sorts of other issues, though ultimately that may have to occur in some egregious cases. We heard about the challenges of picking up on some of the social issues in these supply chains. Very good progress with partners like ProForest, who are on the steering committee also of the accountability framework, with efforts like the CDP and others, companies like AgroTools, Global Forest Watch on some of the monitoring and data, but still very difficult to pick up and address some of the social issues that are of utmost concern to many organizations, including Rainforest Alliance. With that, Leah, I'll hand back to you. Sorry, we went over a little bit. Go ahead and close this out, and thanks to all the panelists. Over to you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Incredible conversation. Thanks for joining this panel and being part of our conversation. And thanks to everybody who was able to join today. Yeah, we'll hope to see you at future events. If you missed previous webinars in this series, you can find all of the recordings on our website. This whole series has been a great way to dig a little deeper into the accountability framework, understand what it is and how folks are using it. I will show it really quickly here. If you would like to dig a little deeper into the framework, please check out our website, get started, contact us. You can subscribe to our newsletter to get updated on future webinars. We've got a lot of exciting stuff happening and going on, so please continue to join us. Thanks again to our moderator and to our panel, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.